For decades, Robert Redford stayed silent about his deepest heartbreak. Now in his 80s, the Hollywood legend finally breaks his silence, revealing the woman he never stopped loving. She wasn't a co-star or a headline, but her impact shaped his entire life. This is the love story he never told until now. The unexpected confession. He's always been a mystery. Golden, enigmatic, and endlessly private. Robert Redford, now well into his 80s, has lived a life most only dream about. Oscars, acclaim, admiration. But when he sat down for a recent, reflective interview, it wasn't about films, fame, or politics. It was about something much deeper. Someone. For decades, Redford has famously dodged personal questions, steered interviews away from his love life with effortless charm. But this time, something shifted. The question was simple. Was there someone you never got over? He paused, looked down for a moment, and then said her name. The interviewer didn't share it publicly, not out of secrecy, but respect. But they confirmed what stunned the room. Redford had finally opened up about the woman who shaped his heart, and stayed there. "I never stopped thinking about her," he said quietly. The words were unpolished, raw, and perhaps long overdue. Fans were floored. This wasn't Barbra Streisand. This wasn't Jane Fonda. This wasn't one of his dazzling co-stars or publicized exes. No tabloid could have guessed it. And maybe that's the point. For Redford, the confession wasn't about nostalgia. It was about truth. A truth he'd carried silently for most of his life, tucked somewhere between the spaces of his smile and the stories he never told. And for a man known for letting his films speak louder than his interviews, this moment was louder than any monologue he'd ever delivered. A reputation built on silence. To understand the weight of Redford's confession, you have to understand how much he values silence. Throughout his 6-decade career, he has mastered the art of keeping the world at arm's length. No scandals, no oversharing, just work, and a smile that kept people guessing. He wasn't trying to be aloof. He simply believed that privacy was sacred. And when it came to matters of the heart, that boundary was even firmer. He once said, "Intimacy isn't for headlines," and he meant it. Fans speculated endlessly over the years. There were whispers of co-star romances, fleeting affairs, and great loves never confirmed. But Redford never gave the press what they wanted. He kept his stories and his scars close to the chest. And yet, that silence came at a cost. Because when you hide the pain, you also bury the beauty. And the woman he now speaks of was not just a passing romance. She was, by all accounts, his great, quiet love. As he ages, that silence seems to weigh heavier. The need to protect something sacred has evolved into the need to honor something real. And while he may never offer details, the fact that he named her at all was a tectonic shift in the world of a man who spent a lifetime hiding his heart. The early love, Lola Van Wagenen, before Hollywood, before Sundance, before the suits and awards and red carpets, there was Lola. Redford's first wife, Lola Van Wagenen, was with him when he had nothing but dreams and determination. They married in 1958, raised 4 children, and built a quiet life long before the cameras came calling. Redford has always spoken of Lola with immense respect. She's a historian, an activist, and a woman who carved out her own identity apart from his spotlight. Their marriage lasted nearly 3 decades, ending in 1985, but never in bitterness. Yet, when asked about his deepest emotional connection, Redford didn't name Lola. Those close to him say their relationship was built on loyalty and partnership. but not always on passion. They grew up together, built a life together. But as fame grew and lives changed, so did their bond. Insiders have said for years that while Redford adored Lola as the mother of his children and a foundational figure in his life, she wasn't the woman who haunted him. That space belonged to someone else, someone outside the frame. Redford's ability to compartmentalize love and loyalty was always a quiet strength. But in his later years, he seems to be revisiting what those compartments cost him. And with Lola, the love was steady. But with the other woman, the unnamed one, it was unforgettable. The Audrey Hepburn rumors. In 1967, Barefoot in the Park lit up movie screens with a kind of chemistry that didn't feel rehearsed. It felt lived in. Robert Redford and Audrey Hepburn were magic. The film's charm was built on their ease with one another, their soft glances, their unspoken rhythm. And for decades, fans wondered, was it real? They were both in committed relationships at the time, both famously private. But on set, there was an energy crew members still talk about. Not overtly romantic, but undeniably intimate. Years later, Redford called Hepburn one of the most graceful women I've ever known. That statement, simple as it was, carried weight, because Redford doesn't throw words like that around lightly. Some now speculate that Audrey may have been the one who slipped through his fingers. Timing, commitment, maybe even caution. Whatever the reason, nothing came of it, at least not publicly. But close friends say Redford held a special space for her. She represented elegance, mystery, and restraint, qualities he deeply admired and mirrored in his own life. Their connection, whether romantic or emotional, was never confirmed. But it was always felt. And in a world of headlines and guesses, that quiet connection has become one of the most romantic chapters in Redford's unspoken story. The Barbra Streisand obsession. Of all his on-screen pairings, none sparked more fascination than Redford and Streisand in The Way We Were, 1973. Their chemistry didn't just leap off the screen, it lingered long after the credits rolled. It was passionate, fiery, unresolved. And that's because, in many ways, it was real. Barbra Streisand later admitted without hesitation, "I adored him. I had a massive crush." Redford, always more reserved, was less forthcoming. But he did say once, "Timing and caution got in the way of something special." A sentence that says everything by saying so little. The story behind the scenes is layered. Streisand was bold, emotionally open. Redford was guarded, protective. Together, they were cinematic lightning. But off-camera, they never crossed the line. At least, not fully. Friends have often said that Barbra got closer to Redford than almost anyone else. And perhaps that closeness was what scared him. He feared blurring the line between performance and reality, between character and truth. But decades later, he still speaks of her with fondness, admiration, and just a hint of regret. Because sometimes, the loves we remember most are the ones we never let begin. Why he never dated his leading ladies, publicly. In a career filled with silver screen sirens and legendary performances, Robert Redford made one thing clear. His private life was never going to be a sequel to his films. He refused to become another headline. And part of that self-protection meant one steadfast rule: never date your co-stars, at least not in public. He once said, "I didn't want real feelings to cloud the work." It was a principle that helped him maintain professionalism and mystery. The on-screen romance? That was for the audience. The off-screen reality? That stayed in the shadows. But over the years, rumors swirled. Because there was something electric between Redford and many of his leading ladies. Natalie Wood, Meryl Streep, Michelle Pfeiffer. It wasn't just good acting, it was connection. Insiders say one woman, in particular, tested his resolve. Someone who blurred the line between scene partner and soulmate. Someone who might have been more than just a co-star, but never officially was. That choice, to keep things distant, even when the heart wanted otherwise, became a pattern, a defense mechanism, and eventually, a regret. Because when Redford finally opened up about the one woman he never got over, he didn't say, "We were together." He said, "I never stopped thinking about her." Sometimes, the feelings we hide for the sake of control become the memories that never stop chasing us. The loss of his firstborn son. In 1959, just as Redford's career was beginning to take shape, he faced a heartbreak that would change him forever. His first child, Scott Anthony Redford, died of sudden infant death syndrome at just 2 months old. It was a private tragedy in a life that would become very public, and it shaped him in ways he rarely discussed. The grief was overwhelming. Redford was young, ambitious, and suddenly hollowed out by loss. There were no tools back then to process it, no therapists, no support networks. He kept going. But something inside him cracked. Years later, he admitted, "You never get over that kind of loss. You just carry it differently." Some believe that during that time, when he was emotionally at his most vulnerable, he met a woman who saw him not as the rising actor, but as the grieving father. She helped him survive the unspoken. She helped him feel again. Their bond wasn't built on glamour, it was built on pain. And for Redford, that emotional intimacy planted something deeper than infatuation. It was a connection forged in the ashes of loss, and it stayed with him. He never named her publicly, but when asked what love really meant, Redford once said, "It's the person who sat with you when you were broken." And perhaps that's who she was. The elusive Swedish actress. It was the 1970s. Redford was at the height of his fame. Handsome, talented, untouchable. But during a film shoot in Europe, something unexpected happened. He met her. A Swedish actress, not a household name, not a headline, but someone who saw through the persona. In a rare quote, Redford said, "She saw me when I didn't know who I was yet." That line, cryptic and poetic, hints at something deeper than a fling. It suggests discovery. It suggests intimacy. It suggests something that mattered. The affair was brief. Geography and careers pulled them in different directions. But those close to Redford say he kept a photograph of her in his study for years. A candid image, not posed, not red carpet ready. Just her, laughing. He never spoke of her again. But friends say that part of his heart never left Europe. It stayed in that fleeting moment of connection, in that time before fame consumed everything. And now, when he talks about the woman he never got over, some believe it was her. The one who saw him before the world claimed him. Sometimes, it's the love that isn't meant to last that leaves the deepest echo. The Sundance years and private affairs. By the time the 1980s arrived, Robert Redford had begun stepping away from Hollywood's relentless orbit. The fame, the flashes, the frantic pace. It had all started to feel too loud. He wanted something quieter. So he poured himself into Sundance, turning a small, experimental idea into a globally respected sanctuary for independent voices in film. But while the public saw Redford the visionary, Utah locals began whispering about something far more personal. There was a woman, not an actress, not a socialite, not someone anyone would recognize in a crowd. She was part of the art world, creative, sharp, and unbothered by celebrity. Some say she worked in set design. Others claim she curated exhibits nearby. What they all agree on is this: she and Redford shared something meaningful. They were never photographed together. She didn't accompany him to galas, but she visited often, sometimes for a weekend, sometimes for weeks. They'd walk trails, talk about politics, art, aging. She challenged him in ways few ever could. She saw through the fame, the titles, the legend, and saw the man underneath. Those who spent time around Redford during those years say his demeanor changed when she was near. He was softer, more contemplative, less guarded, as if she was the only person who reminded him how to simply exist. "She didn't ask for anything," he once said offhandedly. "She just brought peace." Eventually, she returned to Europe. The reasons remain vague: distance, timing, maybe just life moving on. There was no dramatic parting, no heartbreak scene, just absence. But her memory remained. Redford never confirmed the relationship publicly. He never spoke her name. But when asked years later, in a rare moment of openness, what love meant to him, he replied, "It's not always loud. Sometimes it's what calms the noise." And that sentiment felt like a direct echo of her. Those who remember the quiet woman from Utah believe she left more than a memory. She left a stillness, a reminder that even legends need places to hide, to breathe, to feel human again. She may never appear in any biography, but in the years when Redford was shaping a movement, she was shaping something far more intimate: his inner world. And for a man who built an empire on storytelling, the story of her was one he never shared, but clearly never forgot. Jane Fonda, longtime confidant. Few names have been tied to Robert Redford as often or as tenderly as Jane Fonda. They starred in multiple films together, from Barefoot in the Park to Our Souls at Night, and their chemistry only grew stronger with time. Fonda once said in an interview, "He was the one who got away. I loved him." It was a bold admission, made without shame and filled with reverence. Redford's response was quiet, but just as revealing. "Jane knew me better than most." Their relationship was always defined by deep emotional understanding. They laughed easily, argued rarely, and even as their lives took different paths, the connection never broke. Some believe that their love was never consummated in the traditional sense, but that it didn't need to be. Theirs was a soul bond, not a scandal. In fact, when Redford finally opened up about the woman he never got over, some assumed it was Jane. But he clarified: Jane's family. It was a beautiful kind of heartbreak, the kind where love existed, even if it never became a romance. Because not all great loves end in marriage. Some end in friendship. And sometimes, that's the most enduring love of all. Why he hid the truth for so long. For most of his life, Robert Redford treated his personal world like sacred ground, untouched by Hollywood, off-limits to tabloids, and invisible to the spotlight. If he was in love, if he was in pain, if he carried regret, no one outside his tight circle would ever know. He believed that privacy was dignity, and dignity was everything. That's why, when Redford finally acknowledged the woman he never got over, it felt seismic, because it meant peeling back a curtain he'd drawn shut for nearly 60 years. "Some loves aren't loud," he said quietly in a recent conversation. "They're just permanent." He didn't name her to provoke headlines. He did it because time was catching up, because silence had turned heavy, and because What he felt deserved to be remembered. Not sensationalized, but respected. Friends say he feared that revealing her identity would invite scrutiny, distortion, dissection. That the purity of what they had, however fleeting or unspoken, would be lost in gossip and speculation. He'd seen it happen before. Relationships reduced to clickbait. Truth twisted into fiction. He didn't want that for her. Not in life, and not in death. But with age came a shift. He began to realize that honoring someone doesn't always mean keeping them hidden. Sometimes it means giving voice to what they meant. And in finally acknowledging her, he wasn't trying to relive the past. He was trying to make peace with it. Because the older we get, the more we realize that love, true, soul-shaping love, doesn't disappear. It just waits. Sometimes for decades. The letter he never sent. Some things are easier written than spoken. For Robert Redford, the letter he wrote in his 70s wasn't crafted for an audience or to be read aloud. It was a confession, a memory, and a goodbye, all wrapped into one. It was meant for her, the one woman who never left his heart, the one he never stopped loving. But he never mailed it. He wrote it late one night, years after they had last spoken. His house was quiet. The world had stopped asking questions about his past. And maybe that's why he finally picked up a pen and let the words come. 6 pages. No edits. No rewrites. Just thoughts. Unfiltered and raw. Regrets for not speaking sooner. Gratitude for the impact she had on his life. Longing for moments they never had. It was all there. Every sentence carried weight. Every paragraph held the ache of years he'd tried to forget, but never could. I wrote everything I never told her, he later said. She might never see it, but writing it helped me breathe again. He never explained why he didn't send it. Maybe he didn't want to risk stirring up old pain. Maybe he wasn't sure how it would land after so much time had passed. Or maybe he knew that the purpose of the letter was never to be read. It was to be released. A way to finally let go, not of the love, but of the silence. He folded it once, tucked it between yellowed film notes and black and white photographs, and slid it into an old leather notebook he rarely opened. It stayed there for years, a secret resting quietly alongside the scripts and storyboards of his life. The letter was only discovered later by a close friend who was helping him sort through belongings. They didn't read it. Redford simply held it in his hand for a moment, then placed it back where it belonged. She meant that much, he said. Nothing more. In an era filled with fast love, fleeting affection, and broken promises, that letter became something rare. Proof. Proof that some connections don't fade with time. That even if a relationship doesn't get the ending it deserves, it still lives on in memory, in art, and sometimes in a letter never sent. It was his final unsent message. A love story without an ending, written not for closure, but for courage. Because sometimes the greatest truths aren't the ones we say out loud. They're the ones we write quietly, fold gently, and carry with us until we no longer need to. The passing of the woman in question. In a recent interview, Robert Redford did something he rarely does. He spoke about her openly, though carefully. What caught people off guard wasn't what he said, but how he said it. For the first time, he used the past tense. His voice, usually composed, controlled, calm, cracked ever so slightly when he admitted, "I felt it more than I thought I would." It was a quiet heartbreak, not cinematic, not dramatic, just honest. He didn't go to the funeral. not out of apathy, but out of reverence. She had lived her life away from the spotlight, and Redford chose to honor her in the same spirit. The family didn't know the full story, not from him anyway. Their bond had always existed in a world just beneath the surface, private and protected. So he grieved the way he had always loved her, quietly, deeply, without spectacle. Friends close to Redford believe she passed away in the early days of the pandemic, those years when goodbyes were often said in silence, with no public mourning, no elaborate farewells. There was no obituary in the headlines, no social media tribute, just an absence, sharp and sudden. But those who knew Redford well saw the shift. Something softened in him. He slowed down, became more reflective, more distant, as if a final thread had been cut, a connection he had held onto for decades, even if only in memory. "She was light," he said quietly, "and when she left, I felt the dark again." It wasn't just grief. It was the kind of sorrow that comes when you lose the last witness to a part of your soul. The finality of her passing didn't change his feelings. It made them more permanent. And for the first time, with no more secrets to protect, Redford gave himself permission to speak. Not to expose her, not to dramatize their history, but to honor her legacy, the invisible yet undeniable presence she had been in his life. A presence the world never saw, but he carried like a song only he could hear. Now, as age gives him distance and clarity, he knows her story deserves more than silence. And even though he still hasn't shared her name, the confession itself, after so many years, speaks volumes. She was the one. And maybe that's why the truth is rising now, not for closure, but for something deeper. For a legacy built not on celebrity or drama, but on the truth of a love that lived quietly in the shadows. Because even if the world never knew her name, Robert Redford did. And in the end, that was enough. How she influenced his life choices. She was never part of the Hollywood headlines, never walked a red carpet, never smiled beside him in glossy magazine spreads. But Robert Redford never made a major life decision without thinking of her. That was the depth of her influence, quiet, enduring, invisible to the world, but essential to him. To those close to Redford, she wasn't just a chapter. She was a compass, a soft-spoken force who left a permanent imprint on his soul. While the world saw an actor, director, and activist, she saw something different. She saw the man underneath, the one who needed space to feel, not perform. And in return, he let her into a part of himself he rarely revealed to anyone. Friends say her presence guided his evolution, especially in his later years. She nudged him toward causes that mattered, long before they became trendy. His passion for environmentalism, his commitment to preserving the American West, his fight to protect nature through the Sundance Institute, all of it was influenced by her love for simplicity, for the earth, for things that couldn't be bought or sold. She also played a role in shaping the father he became. After the devastating loss of his first child and the guilt that followed, she helped him reframe what it meant to be present, not just physically, but emotionally. She urged him to stop hiding behind projects and learn to sit in silence with his children, to ask them how they felt, to listen without fixing. In one rare moment of candor, Redford said, "She taught me to listen more than speak." It wasn't just a habit. It became a philosophy. That mindset carried over into his directing. Unlike many actors who turned to directing for control, Redford directed to explore grief, restraint, the fragile nature of connection. Films like Ordinary People, The Horse Whisperer, and A River Runs Through It aren't just stories, they're emotional blueprints. They explore loss, healing, and the spaces between people. And if you look closely, she's in all of them. A whispered presence, a woman who disappears just before the credits roll, but whose shadow lingers in every frame. He once told a friend, "Every character I directed had a little of her in it." She became the ghostwriter of his legacy. And while the public never saw her face, never knew her name, Redford has now made it clear. His journey, the real one, the one behind the fame, was never truly walked alone. She was always there, not next to him, but within him. Now, as he reflects on a life filled with accolades, he's finally willing to say it. His greatest influence wasn't a director, a co-star, or a studio executive. It was her. The final reveal. The moment came near the end of the interview. The air was still. The camera wasn't even rolling. Redford leaned back, folded his hands, and said simply, "She wasn't famous. She wasn't on any covers, but she was everything real." That stunned the room. Not because of who she was, but because of who she wasn't. She wasn't Streisand. She wasn't Fonda. She wasn't a face the world already knew. She was the name he'd never given until now. A woman who lived outside the spotlight, and yet was the brightest light he ever knew. "That's why I never got over her," he said. Not with sorrow, but with peace. For fans who spent decades imagining the great love of Robert Redford's life, the truth was something far more human than Hollywood. It wasn't a co-star or a scandal. It was a woman who listened, who stayed, who left too soon. And now, after a lifetime of silence, Redford finally let the world see the wound and the beauty it left behind. Because the greatest love stories aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones never told, until the very end. She never sought fame, yet she became the heartbeat of his quietest truths. Robert Redford didn't name her for attention, he did it for peace. In finally revealing the one woman he never got over, he showed us that some love stories don't need cameras. They just need to be remembered.